And not going to lie, guys, the future's looking bleak. It's not looking good for us.
Buy your magnums and enjoy the grass while you can, because it's going to be a hot summer. Hello and welcome back to No Books on a Dead Planet. This is a kind of book club that's not a book club. You're allowed to come if you haven't read the book. You're allowed to come if you intend to read the book, because we're going to leave some of the spoilers out. I basically created this book club-ish thing because I've realised that I'm really struggling to envision what a lot of climate research is calling the end of the world. Doesn't compute, cannot engage, absolute shutdown in my brain. However, no books on a planet... that seems like an emergency to me. So I've been inviting really cool people onto the channel to force me to read some of the climate books that I am scared to read. And today we are welcoming none other than Jack Edwards.
Hello.
OMFG.
Thanks so much for having me. Oh, this is my favourite channel on YouTube.com, so I'm buzzing.
Oh my God. Well, that's going to be my quote on my banner now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. So me and Jack decided to read Parable of the Sower together by Octavia E. Butler. Jack's a nerd and he has the actual book. I listen to the e-book because I'm lazy. So I don't have anything to show you, but just picture it. It's right here.
I'll hold it.
Yeah, exactly. Hold it for both of us.
I will not. Your glamorous assistant over here.
I know. I'm also very intimidated. Can you just show the side of your book, please, Jack? That is a lot of tabs.
I did tab it.
This is the book of a man who has recently graduated from university and still remembers how to be analytical about books. I know. Let it go, Jack. They're just books.
Yeah.
Nothing means anything anymore. Life is pain.
The curtains are just blue because the curtains are blue.
Exactly. Oh my God.
There's no deeper meaning.
Yeah. You're like, oh God, don't even remind me. I'm having flashbacks already. But yeah, so we're going to chat about this book and also just about a bit about our feelings about reading and the climate in general. So if you want to listen along, please do. Get a cuppa, sit down. We're going to have a proper little natter. Now, Jack, when I invited you on the channel, I gave you a long list of books that I would like to read about the climate, my to-do list.
Yes.
And you picked this one. I want to hear why. Was there any reason, or were the curtains just blue?
Well, the curtains might have looked a bit like this. Firstly, for me... I find that fiction is my ultimate gateway into understanding the world and things that I maybe normally shy away from and I find a little bit intimidating. And so when you send me a list of lots of amazing sounding non-fiction and fiction, this is what kind of drew me in. It's also a sort of dystopia, which is something that I quite enjoy. So it was a bit up my street, and then it was also about the climate crisis. And so I thought, what a perfect way to learn some more about it and see what someone thought could happen.
I definitely think there's more climate fiction emerging now.
Yeah.
But I think when Octavia, I'm gonna school call her Octavia because I feel like we're friends. It's fine.
Yeah.
When Octavia released this in like 1993, I think it was, or 1994, there wasn't that much climate fiction around. So I think that's really interesting itself. It's a bit of a historical artifact that's climate fiction before it was cool.
Exactly, and it's the kind of book that you read and you can't believe that it was written that long ago because it feels like it could have been written and published this year.
Yeah.
And it would still be a sort of dystopia anyway, even though it's written, I think it's set in about 2027. And that isn't that long away.
It actually, I was looking at back at this because I can remember it actually starts in 2024.
Yes.
Which is a mere 18 months away.
And not going to lie, guys, the future's looking bleak. It's not looking good for us.
Buy your magnums and enjoy the grass while you can, because it's going to be a hot summer.
When you say magnums, do you mean the cider or the ice lolly or both?
Why limit yourself? Both. The world's on fire.
Yeah.
Let's party. So this book, if just to give you a little brief, if you haven't read it, it follows Lauren, who is 15 at the beginning of the book, 18 when the book ends, which is very important if you know what happens. It's incredibly important that she is actually at the age of consent towards the end.
Yes.
And she is she's got hyper empathy, which is actually a thing that somebody in another book, in another episode of this series has in We Were Wolves. Once There Were Wolves, that main character also has hyper empathy. So I think it's interesting that that's like a choice that climate fiction writers have, is to give this one main character something that's like a little bit more of an empathy superpower. And basically she lives in a compound in this future that is actually our present, where because of the climate and also because of lots of economic reasons, I think, as well, it seems you never get an actual story of why the world has broken down, but it's clear that it has.
It's apparent that it has. Immediately apparent that it has.
The nervous laughter is because I think, I don't know about you, Jack, but I found this a completely harrowing book to read.
Yes, I don't think I'm the same person anymore after reading this.
I mean, that's bold, but I'm not surprised. But yeah, she's part of the middle class, so they live in a compound. Correct me if, by the way, at any point, if you think that I'm saying this wrong, by the way,
I think that's right.
Yeah, she lives in a compound. She's in the middle classes. The majority of people live outside of compounds with no access to water or electricity or anything, and they're basically just kind of living off their own backs, stealing. Lots of like horrific stuff is happening on the outside, basically. And then a select few, obviously, have all the control of all the electricity, all the water, living it up in gold palaces.
Yeah,
a classic. So she was like born a Baptist, but she actually has renounces God at the beginning of the book and feels like she is creating, although she describes it as discovering a religion.
Yes,
but which again I was like, Lauren, talk me through that, please.
Yeah.
But she's creating a religion called Earthseed, and she's writing a book about it called Earthseed, the Book of the Living. Mm-hmm. So it's a very strange premise. Was it, when you started the book, was it what you were expecting? Were you a bit like, oh? Yeah,
do you know what I found really interesting about this in terms of it being a dystopia is that often a lot of the dystopias that I've read are about a world with something heightened. So like with heightened surveillance, with heightened censorship, things like that. This is a dystopia about a world without. It's about a world that has been so finite that we are actually running out of things. And so it's essentially stripping back what we currently have rather than kind of adding new rules to the world. I thought it was really interesting that it's kind of like a world that is so desolate and kind of empty. The electricity is running low, that water is running low, and it's sort of about how humans would respond to that, and surprise, they don't respond well.
It doesn't end well for most of the humans. Yeah, and there's also the most stressful part is that there's this drug going around called pyro that basically when you take it, it makes you want to set things on fire. So that obviously adds an extra layer of stress for the community. Yes. Lauren is black, but she lives in a rare compound community that is like multiracial and really diverse, but that doesn't seem to be apparent on the outside. So I know that like Octavia Butler was like at college during the Black Power movement and stuff, so I'm sure that there's lots of parallels there about kind of racial segregation and her idea of something that is integrated but ultimately is quite fractured at the same time. It's really interesting. It's interesting in this book they often resort to having walls around communities and isolating certain groups and yeah, like you said, the segregation is huge. So it is interesting how these things do seem to crop up in a lot of dystopias, because it is weirdly the way that humans seem to react to things that they don't understand is to kind of block it off, block it away. And that does happen in here too. Yeah, it's weird as well, because I know that so much of it is based on reality. Yeah. But I also want to think like, oh, would we really respond that way? Because in some ways the response, say, to the pandemic was really great, and a lot of people actually banded together and were a lot more selfless. And there's this book called Hope in the Dark by Rebecca Solnit that is like going through all of the historical moments, like examples of when there's war and scarcity, like people tend to club together. They don't tend to eat each other immediately. But I think there's a lot of that as well. So it's like weird for me to be like, okay, this is possible, and people would be driven to that. And ultimately it is an exaggeration of a world we already live in. It does sort of descend into chaos and anarchy, but it's interesting because it initially starts out as quite a small group who are doing it. People living on the outside of society are the ones who sort of start with the crime and kind of scavenging people's houses and stuff, and then it does eventually become the only way to survive because people start doing that. So it starts with a small group and then it does expand outwards. So you can see how it's not like, oh, it just happened overnight that we all just became savages and we just were like being awful to each other and killing each other, eating each other. It sort of happens like weirdly over time. Where would you place this in terms of other books that you've read? Because my brain went I would put it in the same category as something like The Handmaid's Tale, perhaps. Yeah, or Station 11 or something like that has like kind of like desert-like environment where there's one main character trying to survive and you're following them as they either ascend or descend into madness. So yeah, I'd probably put it there, but I honestly thought it was a lot more sparse in the way the world was created, so it's hard, like it. I don't know if that made that more scary, because in like Station 11 and like Handmaid's Tale, you do get an idea of what else is going on in the world, and like you can picture more. But with her, maybe because she's 15 as well, she's just kind of wandering around the world like this, and you don't know what's going to come at you next, because she's only describing what's happening to her. And I found that even more stressful than The Handmaid's Tale.
Yes, because there was no perception of what was happening to everyone else. It was very much, this is what's happening to my community, and it's terrifying. And she sort of then ends up living life on the road. And she is so young as well.
I know. And also, like, it's unclear, like, maybe I'm just like a selfish Brit, but I'm like, okay, but what's happening in Britain? Is this happening in Britain right now, or is this just an American thing that's going on?
Yeah, like, are we what's going to happen to us?
Is Europe okay?
Yeah, should I start preparing like the bunker now? Octavia, what's going to happen to me?
Yeah, I'm like, but am I getting a grab bag?
Yeah, it's not good for Lauren, so...
Yeah, it's interesting, and I think as well, like, I was wondering when I was reading it, I was like, what would this be like if it was told in third person? Because it's told in first person, so you're only really getting her descriptors of stuff, and like, the language is quite sparse, but I can tell from the writing that Octavia Butler's an incredible writer, so I'm like, I wonder if and I don't know, this is my first Octavia Butler book, I don't know, but
yeah, me too.
She might have written stuff in third person or in other ways that I might enjoy more, because in some ways, like, I don't know if I love the writing style, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
Even though I think the world building is really good.
I agree. I found the inclusion of the hyper empathy that you spoke about just quite a weird extra feature that actually wasn't really necessary to the plot, because we could have understood the whole story without her having this crazy hyper empathy. I suppose it's sort of what leads her in particular to be the one who establishes this new sort of religion and this new worldview, but it felt a little inconsistent to me that she feels this hyper empathy. Sometimes basically when people are murdered, she feels the same pain that they feel, but at other times she seems to forget that she has hyper empathy, and I was thinking, I felt like this should have been mentioned more, if this feels like quite an important integral feature.
But yeah, because it affects her so much, it's like how... I think realistically, somebody with hyper empathy wouldn't really last past the age of 5.
Yeah,
in this kind of world. So you're gonna have to, because she's so affected by it, like she'll literally just pass out. Or
I thought that was a strange addition to the book that wasn't necessary. Maybe that was the one thing I sort of struggled with, is what is the relevance of the hyper empathy?
And it's not brought on by any kind of magical thing. It's like she has it because her mum was an addict, so it was something to do with that, and like a user. So yeah, again, I was a bit confused by that. But there is a sequel, so maybe in the sequel they explain the like bigger significance of hyper empathy. I'm always open to them being something.
Well, will you be reading the sequel? Are you?
Oh God,
because I think probably not. But I enjoyed this.
Yeah,
I enjoyed this book, but I don't know if I'd want to read more about this particular world.
So I want to read the sequel, but this accidental segue into something I was going to read out to you that I found on Wikipedia, which is obviously where the truth lies.
Oh, look at this. Anton Deck, pack it up. There's a new double accent sound.
I know. Da-da-da-da. Let's go. What did they used to do? That house, what was it called? In the House.
Yeah.
Jack and Leena in the House. So yeah, the sequel's called The Parable of the Talents. Okay, so The Parable of the Talents won loads of awards. Okay, but she had a plan for 4 other novels. Parable of the Trickster, Parable of the Teacher, Parable of the Chaos, and Parable of Clay. However, after several failed attempts to begin The Parable of the Trickster, she decided to stop working on the series. In later interviews, Butler explained that the research and writing of the Parable novels had overwhelmed and depressed her, so she had shifted to composing something lightweight and fun instead. That became her last book, Fledgling. So if the author was too stressed and depressed by writing the books, should I, a hopeful climate person, yeah, there's like a certain level where I'm like, if the creator of the world can't handle it.
Yeah, can I? Am I strong enough? And I'm not sure if I am. Yeah.
I barely survived Little Life, so I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's telling.
But I think it's a great standalone novel, so I don't think that takes away from anything, and I think it's great as it is.
That's what I felt. I felt reading it that it worked very well as a standalone. So that's why I don't think I'm invested enough to maybe read a second installment. I felt that once it ended, I was like, I'm satisfied with this as a piece of art that I have consumed.
Totally. And there is hope at the end as well. Again, we're not going to talk too many spoilers, but there is hope at the end.
Yeah.
And her aim is to create this community. And eventually, like at the very beginning of the book, she talks about how she thinks the destiny of humanity is to leave the planet. So Elon Musk vibes, but in, hopefully a more socialist way.
Yeah.
Which is interesting.
Maybe it's a bit closer to like 2022 than we thought.
Yeah.
Now all the billionaires are jetting off. It's like, oh, what do you know that we don't, Octavia?
I know. Have you read a lot of science fiction before? Because this is kind of in that genre, but kind of not. Like,
yeah, bits and bobs, not massive amounts, but I agree with you that there's that element of kind of, we've destroyed this planet and we need to now look for another one to inhabit, which is sort of how a lot of sci-fi books begin. That's almost where this one feels it's going. Yes. Do you know what I mean? So it's almost like, it's like pre-sci-fi in a way. It's like, this is like the apocalypse before the sci-fi kind of takes place.
Yeah,
in a
you're
weird
right.
way, so.
And again, like, I don't really, from what I've read, I don't really feel like we're at that stage yet where we do need to just sack it off. And go. So in that way, I'm like,
this one off, guys. Let's go.
It's a lost cause. So in that way, like, I kind of think that it's a really useful thought exercise. But because the world that she predicted for 2024 does actually look a lot better, actually made me kind of very grateful for the world we do have. So I'm feeling like hopefully it will be more hopeful. I wonder if she was alive today, if she would write it in a different way. Questions we'll never know.
Yeah, well, there you go. We'll never be able to ask.
Yeah, exactly. Do you have any like moments that stood out to you, or anything that you're like, okay, that's a part of the book that I'll never forget? I want to hear what's in your tabs.
Well, yes.
Get out your tabs.
My theory, my theory behind reading is that you kind of have like two stories contained in one book. One is the story that is, printed in black and white for you, and the other is kind of like the story of you actually reading it, which is why I love like marking my copies. I'm such a believer in dog-earing the pages and underlining my favourite bits, because I think that when someone then comes up to my bookshelf and they can take a book off, instead of reading the blurb, they can go through and read like my favourite bits, which I think is really fun. So that's why I'm a serial tabber and an underliner and a dog-earer, and people get very annoyed at me for that, because they're like, you're ruining that beautiful book. And I'm like, yeah, actually, we had a great time together.
You wouldn't be like, oh, Jack, can't believe you're wearing that T-shirt. Like, oh, you're ruining it. Like, you're going to put holes in it by having fun in it. And it's like, oh, Jesus Christ,
yeah, exactly.
take a holiday.
Oh, yeah, my books are in terrible condition, and I wouldn't have them any other way.
Worse than somebody with a pristine book collection that's never read any of them.
That's true. That's if you leave with nothing else today, it's destroy your books.
Yeah.
Not in like a Fahrenheit 451 way though, like in a love your book so much that it gets destroyed way.
Yeah.
But I was going to read you this bit where they say, worship is no good without action. With action, it's only useful if it steadies you, focuses your efforts, eases your mind. And I thought that was interesting about how she is creating her own faith and her own religion. But she basically says, it's all well and good to believe in something, but I want to believe in something that I feel is malleable and can shape, so the belief I have will shape my life, but I will also shape the belief around what I'm experiencing. It felt a lot more, a lot less rigid, I think, than maybe some organised religion that we do encounter today feels. She sort of is at this point where the world is in such a state of destruction, she's had to resort to something new, where like she can adapt to what she's actually currently experiencing and make sense of the world, because that is what religion is for, really, isn't it? To make sense of what's happening. And so she talks about religion as change, and it's something that kind of happens to the world, but also can be fixed in a way. Like, she has hope that if something has changed to this state, we can change it back out again. And I thought that was quite nice. So I liked the idea of worship being an active thing that she was engaging in. I thought that summarised her kind of ideology quite well.
Yeah, totally. And I guess it also means that it's less open to corruption, because if God is change, then you're allowed to just like incite change. Because I think a lot of like her community were just either hoping for things to go back to the way they were, or they were just hoping for them to stay the same. And she was the person who was like, we need to leave the compound. This is not good. We need to... And everybody else is against it. So yeah, you're right. I think it is religion, but maybe not as we know it.
Which she says of God, like she kind of uses God as a way to explain the way that she understands religion to other people, to kind of essentially translate it into the terminology that we can understand for faith and religion. Because she's done a lot of thinking about this. She really is deep in this earthseed thing, this doctrine that she's got.
Yeah.
But she says it's not a God, it's not a person or an intelligence or even a thing. It's just, I don't know, an idea. So it's sort of this belief that, and so God and change are kind of interchangeable, if you'll pardon the pun. There you go. You can have that one for free. But that interchangeability of those two terms for her is really important, and that's where she kind of separates her beliefs from traditional religion that we currently have today, I guess.
Yeah, totally.
So I thought it was interesting. An interesting way to see the world as being in a constant state of change and transit and flux. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, and I think also like this idea that like religion isn't evil per se, it's more what you do with it. And she's not like, I reject religion. She's more like, I see your religion and I raise you.
And I raise it.
Seed. Yeah, exactly. Let's raise the bar. The quote that I pulled out is kind of like linked to yours a little bit, interestingly. This part says, civilization is to groups what intelligence is to individuals. It's a means of combining the intelligence of many to achieve ongoing group adaptation. Civilization, like intelligence, may serve well, serve adequately, or fail to serve its adaptive function. When a civilization fails to serve, it must disintegrate unless it is acted upon by unifying internal or external forces. I don't quite understand the last sentence that I've like copied out when I was like, because this is stuff that I was like typing while I was listening. But I think that's from Earthseed, and it like this idea that like civilization isn't just this ideal we have. It is like what intelligence is to individuals. Like we need it to make sense of us in groups. Like there's no other way. And just because civilization has broken down doesn't mean that it's a bad idea. Which was nice as well, because I think like she's the empath that wants to like join everybody together, and everybody else is like, the only way you survive is by cutting off other people's heads. And she's like, oh, let's test that theory. Yeah, well,
and it is hopeful in a way, isn't it? Because she's like, okay, the civilization has broken down, but I can see where we can go with it and what our next step is, and it's kind of forming these smaller kind of communes where we believe that change is possible, and if the world changed to this point, it can be changed to the next point. And so there was hope there, which I think was important, and that facilitates the hope that we have at the end of the book, which is pretty crucial, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Do you think it scared you, like, because it kind of shook me, but do you think it scared you in a way that was like, it's scary because you're empathizing with the characters and then imagining that you're there? Or do you think it scared you because like you've thought about that kind of world before and you're like, oh, does that feel a bit too real to you? Do you know what I mean? Because I think for me it was somewhere in between where I was like, well, we're safe, it's fine, it's 2024, it doesn't look that familiar to me. But then part of me was like, oh, this is just reminding me of other times where I've thought about the world ending and it really freaking me out.
I think I was more leaning towards like seeing it as a fiction, in the sense of it did seem like several steps had been taken before we were like cutting each other's heads off at this point. And the desensitization to trauma that she has, you know, without too many spoilers, you know, family members have quite severe things happen to them. And she sort of takes it in her stride, and although she's gutted, you know, it's part of her process of continuing and finding this new tomorrow, I suppose. So, and if anything, it sort of actually sets her free from the community that she's stuck in by becoming sort of an independent person. I found that a little weird because she was meant to be this crazy empath, you know? And yet I was like, there's a lot of putting off your feelings. I feel like we're bottling up here.
Yeah, I mean, when you have this hyper empathy thing, like to what extent can you empathize with yourself? Like, you know what I mean? Like, does it actually stop you from
exactly
from that because you're so focused?
I think it was the desensitization to me to this peril that I found was quite distant from where we're currently at with the climate crisis. And it like you kind of said before, it sort of is like we have the scene that the book sets, and the world building is very much like, okay, we're in this climate crisis, and also the government is completely corrupt, and people have gone a bit crazy, and everyone's sort of fighting for themselves. It is really every man for themselves in this book. So it did feel quite far removed, perhaps, from what seems likely in the immediate future for 2024 to 2027 sort of time period.
Yes, definitely. At least in like the US, and I think like it's scary because like part of it like feels fantastical, but then like the class structures within it are based on ours. Like they're like, there's a lot of people that are just unseen in the book that obviously have either died or will, and it's just unknown to the main character because she's just living her middle class life. That's like, she's got shoes. She's like a teacher, so she's like teaching the other kids. Yeah, she's one of the only literate people left, so she's like teaching people. And stuff like that.
Maybe it does come from an incredibly privileged point of view that this is so unimaginable, and maybe that's a comment as well, that the fact that we can't be. Maybe it's interesting that it is set in a very developed country like America, to see that country be in this state where they don't have access to a lot of things that they take for granted currently. I think probably it was a conscious decision to set it in America. For sure, to envision what it would be like if it happened everywhere. We sort of assume, if this is happening in America, it's probably happened everywhere else too. Us Brits, we're probably in the same boat as Lauren here.
Yeah, we're going down with this ship, I think.
Yeah,
unfortunately. Exactly. I think as well, like the kind of disaster element to it is always interesting to read about, because part of me is like, Leena, this is your fun time. Why are you imagining, like, all of your family, like, dying and, like, your house being burned down? Like, why is this a fun activity for you? But I think it's important because, one, it's good storytelling. Like, I'm distracted from my own life by reading about it, and it makes me think more deeply about my own life, and there's loads of quotes in it that are good. But then also it is kind of like when I read The Road and stuff like that, where because we're surrounded by... Because in the society of capitalism, but like because we're surrounded by all this stuff that makes you forget what's important and can suck you in, like sometimes you need to read stuff like that then you can just have the next day where you're like, isn't it great that I've got clean water running through my tap?
Isn't it great that I can have a shower before reading this? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, sometimes it takes reading books like this to kind of pull my brain out of the capitalist cult. Do you know what I mean? A little bit, and be like, okay, like stop myself being as desensitized to it as I often am. But then it's also like hard because one of the questions that I'd written down was like, would we recommend this to other people? And I'm like, it really depends on where you're at in your life, because I think you still do have to function in everyday life, and to do that you can't constantly be thinking about the end of the world.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have thoughts about whether you'd recommend it to people, or is it specific people you'd recommend it to?
Yeah. It's definitely not like the light-hearted beach read that you may be looking for the summer. But
there is romance, and I quite fancy the romance guy.
Oh, I see.
I had strong Monica and Richard vibes in that relationship.
Okay, I see it. But this is a very niche. Yeah. But I agree wholeheartedly. I think that it's one of those books where I think that collecting books is like collecting wine, where you kind of you buy something that sounds really good, but you might save it for a time where it's going to be good for you to read and that you'll enjoy it the most. Ooh, so I think this is a book to read when you want to kind of get in your head and be a bit like, wow, I really appreciate the things that I take for granted every single day, like things like petrol or running water, electricity. So like we said, it's a very harrowing book. It is incredibly intense and overwhelming at times, and sad to think of a world like this. But so I'm not saying I wouldn't recommend it, but I'm not necessarily going to be like, make this your top priority for 2022,
Yeah, I think it does require basically a trigger warning for everything, none of which we've discussed here on purpose, but like just think of anything that you'd cry, it's in the book.
Yeah, it's there. You'll find it.
So yeah, exactly. So I think there is that element to it. But then also like talking to you and actually like when I was going through my notes and all of the different quotes that I've written down, again, I don't have time to go through all of them now.
Yeah.
But like it made me think that actually this is a really good book club read because it has so many pullable quotes. And like actually I'm having a better time talking to you about the book than I did reading the book.
Reading it. I agree.
That's not a bad thing.
No, not at all. I think, sometimes it's the books that do make you have a bit of a wider discussion about your own life. Those are the ones that are actually really worth your time to read. And there's this wonderful quote by Caleb Azuma Nelson where he says, sometimes it's not about the book that you enjoyed sitting down and reading the most, but it's the ones that kept pulling you back, the ones that you kept thinking about. And maybe this is one of those books where in 2 years' time, I might not remember the fluffy romance that I really enjoyed last week, but I will probably be able to say, I read The Parable of the Sower.
Yeah.
And guys, tomorrow's 2024 and it's not looking good.
Yeah, you're like TikTok. I think, as well, like, because it's like an older book, I know that it has like influenced. There's loads of contention about whether it actually qualifies as an Afrofuturism book, but I know it has like influenced that genre a lot. And I'm wondering, like, as I go more into my aspirational sci-fi phase, it's coming. You can tell that I'm like bored of literary fiction at this point. I think it's becoming
we're really catching it. Like anything that is so completely different to literary fiction, sign me up.
Please get me away from the character studies. I'm wondering if this is actually really good that I've read this because it's a seminal text for those writers. So I'm wondering if I'll, in the same way that like I've read 1984 and then I spot it in other books a lot, of its influence. I wonder if because of that it's actually quite an interesting for us book nerds. It's quite an interesting one to have read, even though it's quite painful to read.
No, I think that's a good point. That there are certain books that you do just find cropping up everywhere, and the influence of the influence of someone like Jane Austen, Charles Dickens does really filter down into what we end up reading today. It's really interesting to have read at least one of their works, and to have dedicated the time to just doing a little bit of extra research than you maybe would normally do, and just going into a little bit of extra detail, because then you do end up, you're right, spotting its echoes of its influence in every book that you end up reading.
Definitely.
I agree. I think that this is probably a book that has inspired a new sort of subgenre perhaps of other stuff.
And I think like I'm interested to read this book that she said that she went on to write. Apparently it's a vampire novel, Fledgling.
I think I'd like to read her in her light-hearted mode.
Yeah, I'm really interested in the rest of her writing because I think she's an incredible world builder, and like some of the quotes she was coming out with as well, I was just like, oh, there's another one I wanted to read out because I thought it was interesting. This is Lauren speaking. She says, I'm trying to write the truth. I'm trying to be clear. I'm not interested in being fancy or even original. Clarity and truth will be plenty if I can only achieve them. And I was like, oh, that's such a good, like that actually links into the whole theme of this series, is because I feel like I have to be like if I'm going to go into a climate conversation, I need to like cross all my T's, dot all my I's. I need to know what I'm talking about. Otherwise I'm going to make a fool out of myself and there's no point. Whereas like for her, she's going into these conversations about her world that's already ending and like making people feel uncomfortable. But because she's like, it is urgent. I'm not perfect. Let's go. Grab a bag. We're leaving. So I thought that was interesting as well, this kind of like idea that like you don't have to be perfect or fancy or even original. Yeah, well, firstly, I would say it is the most validating thing ever when someone else picks the same quote that you also underlined. It's like, yes, a win. Did I? I think we just literary criticismed. I think we did it. I think that's it. We've won. We can retire now. Or we're both wrong together and have terrible tastes together, and that's fine too. What a great company to be wrong with. I'm happy with that. But also, on your actual point that you made, which was brilliant, I agree that I think it's important that she is a child, because it means that we give her the leeway and we allow her the space to try and understand this world, and the fact that she's kind of coming up with her own religion and she's also coming of age, I think is important, that she's given the space to make mistakes and to still be working things out, to still be ironing out all the details. And people do sort of question her on certain things, and she has to think on her feet a little bit about what she actually means when she's
telling people the thoughts that she's having in her head, she's trying to explain it to them, and they do then say, yeah, but what about this? And eventually she does sort of win them all over with her new ideology. I think it's important that she is young, because it just means that we're a bit more sympathetic to allowing her the space to discover and perfect something, rather than having to be the final finished product. She's working it out.
Yeah, totally. And also that like, this is a world that isn't, like, it's still got sexism, it's still got racism in it, and that she's like a black woman who's like, I will lead this new religion / cult / idea-based great idea. Who can say?
Yes.
I bet I'm assuming in the next book we find out whether it was actually a good idea or not.
Yes.
But you're right, that's not without significance and stuff. Have you read that many climate books in general? I think I've seen you pick up a few of them on your channel, but is it something that you are intentionally gravitating towards, or like, how are you feeling in general about your climate reading, and is it something that you even think about as climate reading?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, no, and so I enjoyed this challenge almost. I'm a big advocate for kind of challenging yourself each year, and I know that you are too, with kind of trying to be like, I want to read things that are outside of my comfort zone, otherwise I'll never learn more about the world. And I always try and challenge myself to read more like kind of intersectional authors and diverse authors who I maybe don't come across. They're not the first book that you see when you walk into Waterstones, but they might be a few shelves back. That's really important to me, and reading things that have been translated into English is really important to me as well. So yeah, I think that this is something that perhaps hasn't been my top priority, reading about the climate crisis, and maybe it should be a bit more. So when you suggested this, I was like, oh my gosh, yes, I really want to do this, because it's not something I've necessarily challenged myself to do previously. I think if themes of sustainability and climate change have come up, it's been incidental rather than intentional from me. So yeah, I was grateful to read something that was about those themes. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
No, well, it's perfect, because I felt the same before I started the series, because I always felt like I'd buy the books because I was like, I should have this book. I should have the knowledge in my head. But actually reading it, I was like, oh, I'm not in the best frame of mind. Like, I need to be in I need to set aside a whole weekend and take notes on everything.
Yes.
And actually just muddling my way through the books and reading them imperfectly and not remembering all the stats, but at least coming away with a few top line ideas or like a bit more knowledge. And
I feel like that's why fiction felt like quite a nice way for me to start, especially before going into something that was quite intense and fact-based and lots of statistics and empirical evidence. It was nice to start at least with something that is fiction and you can sort of at least get a little bit lost in, and then have the kind of working it out for yourself as well. I think that's important too, and thinking, what is my relationship with the world that I inhabit, rather than just reading a bunch of kind of quite terrifying statistics. So I definitely think that's important too, but this was a nice starting point to then move on to some stuff that's a bit more kind of maybe immediately important to the world that I actually do inhabit,
Yeah. And I'm realising as well, like the people who are writing the books, they're the experts. You don't have to be an expert to consume what they're talking about. Do you know what I mean?
So true,
you can muddle your way through. Like, the only reason the human race has survived this long is because we could be absolutely fudging it, like half-assing everything, and somehow we've survived. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not like, it's the same. And I think that's about like meat as well, when I was reading about these ideas and being like, actually it's about impact. And like, if everybody cuts out meat and dairy for breakfast, we'd make a huge amount of impact. It's not about a few people identifying as vegan and everybody else being sinners. And I think it might be the same for reading. I'm like, let's all fudge it, let's all read a little bit, compare notes. Like,
exactly.
we can't be just a few people who have read all the books and nobody else has read anything. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, it's just kind of like a healthy plate of food, isn't it? It's like, shove a bit of climate fiction on there. It's good for you.
And then if we're all kind of coming to the table with the little bits that we've taken away from each book, even if whether we've read the same ones for a book club or different books, to then each be able to kind of bring in a slightly nuanced perspective makes us more powerful as a a hole, I think. Speaking about power, my laptop is about to die. I'm grabbing the charger.
Yeah, go.
Chaos, it's here.
critical.
Don't worry, everyone. It's fine. Before we started shooting, we had the conversation that we're only as powerful as our technology allows us to be in this industry.
It's proving true on every level.
It's proving... Oh, no! Guys, adapters.
Oh, God.
Oh, we're back.
He's here.
We're like, just as we're getting into the existential crisis, now we'll have just like a mini personal one as well.
Yeah, just be like, oh, God. I think I want to end, because this feels like a perfect way to end, but like I wanted, just because you're here and we have access to your incredible brain, you read a lot of books and you get around to a lot of books that sometimes you don't like, but you make your way through them. And that is something that probably would have benefited my degree. It's probably why you came out with a way better degree than me. Do you have any tips for people who are like trying to get around to a book and like actually just they have a brain block and they're like, I actually can't? Like, is there any like tips or tricks or like hacks that you can tell people about?
My mindset is always that in order to be a better reader, sometimes getting through a book that I'm really not enjoying is just as important as finishing one that I did really enjoy, because I learned so much about what I like. And for me, I always, if anyone says, oh, that book by XYZ, I hated that. And I always say, why? Like, what was the reason? Because I think that it's very valid to not enjoy a book, but I always challenge myself to think, what is it about the book that I didn't enjoy? And is that because the book is bad, or because I didn't appreciate the book the audience I was not the intended audience for this book, you know?
Yeah.
For example, I recently read Earthlings by Sayaka Murata, which is very
Oh my God, I've recently read that, and
yes,
more trigger warnings for that.
Yes,
like
exactly.
Jesus Christ, there was stuff in there that I was like, I didn't even realise that I needed to be warned about this coming up in a book.
Exactly, I wouldn't have even searched for a trigger warning for that because I didn't even know that it could be so shocking. Exactly, and I've seen reviews of that. I personally thought it was brilliant writing to be able to make me physically cringe at what I was reading. To have such a visceral response to a book is incredible. But I've seen reviews where people are like, this was too gory, I hated it. And I'm like, well, maybe that you picked up the wrong book for you, which doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad book, but it means it's a book that you didn't enjoy, and that's also very valid. So I always try to challenge myself to think, why didn't I enjoy it, and who would, you know? So, okay, I didn't personally like it, but who would? Who do I know who would like this, you know?
In people's defence of Earthlings, it has a fluffy picture of a toy on the front.
It does.
It looks like the most approachable, adorable book ever, and it ends up being like borderline Human Centipede. And I don't...
Yes.
But maybe that's part of it as well. It's a piece of art.
Yeah.
That's what I'd be like. It was more like Tate Modern than Tate Britain. That's what I'd be like. It's there to
Approach
shock.
with caution.
Yeah.
With that book.
Yeah. Definitely.
But yeah, I always, I don't know if you do this, I think that you do, is having multiple books on the go. And so if I'm reading something like The Parable of the Sower, which is so harrowing and is incredibly intense, this is not the kind of book that I would sit and binge in one sitting. It's not the kind of book that I won't sleep tonight because I can't stop reading it, because I needed to take breaks and to consider, holy shit, that was a lot. That was really intense.
Yeah.
So I like to have some other books on the go. So while I was reading this, I also read the Heartstopper graphic novel series, which is just lovely and adorable and sweet, and it's a real page turner, and it's the kind of thing that is really bingeable. So to me, that kind of keeps the pace up a little bit, so that when I consider reading, there is always something that I can pick up. There's always something I've got on the go that I, for whatever mood I kind of am in.
A balanced diet.
Yeah, definitely. And then, and then things like audiobooks do sometimes help you if you're struggling to get the tone of the book just right. I know that you said that you listen to this as an audiobook.
Yeah.
Which I think does help sometimes when you're struggling a bit with maybe like wanting to pick it up. Whereas I think I'm going to do the dishes, so I'll listen to my audiobook kind of thing. I think that's sometimes how I read things that I'm not responding to well just on the page.
And this is a really good audiobook as well. The person who reads it's really good, and they do loads of different voices because there's loads of different characters. Sometimes having an audiobook really helps because the reader will identify the characters for you in their voice. So you don't need to remember all the names.
Yeah.
Ideal. All the hacks. All the time.
We kind of made an agreement at the beginning of filming that we weren't mentioning character names because we were like, do you remember all of them? Because I don't.
Who can say? It's like first day of work when you get introduced to everybody and you're like, yeah, no idea.
Yeah,
I don't even
it's
know
like
my
you guys
name
just
now.
have one. Yeah, exactly. I've forgotten who I am.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you so much for being on, Jack. You've been absolutely incredible. Thank you for letting us pick your brains.
Oh, thank you for having me.
If you would like to join in the next episode, I've been a little bit organised and I've organised the next 2 episodes. So if you want to get ahead on your reading, next time we are reading This is Vegan Propaganda with Melanie Murphy, which is going to be incredible. And then after that, we're reading Climate Justice by Mary Robinson, and we're reading that with Michelle Ellman, otherwise known as Scarred Not Scared. So if you want to join in and get geeky and read the books with us, those are the ones that you need to put on your TBR. Jack, where can people find you on the internet? Obviously, most people have probably already found you, but for the few...
If there's a social media, I will be on it, and it's just Jack Edwards. Or my second channel is Jack in the Books.
How have you got a name like Jack Edwards and you've got all of the URLs? Who
I
did you
don't.
pay?
Oh my gosh, I had to have all my middle names and bits and bobs. And
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's the kind of name where you just have to accept there will be an underscore or a dot or something, you know.
Yeah, I suppose it's too late to rebrand.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm a bit
You
far
sound
in
like a
now.
really-
Yeah.
Yeah, not Princess Consuela Banana Hammock or something.
Listen, I've been close at times
Yeah.
to that, but I heard it was taken. So,
Well,
yeah.
in the book it said originality is dead, so, you know.
So, Jack Edwards.
Jack Edwards it is.
And with that, I'm signing off as
All
Jack
right.
Edwards.
Thanks for watching Frog Snog Out.